Everyone. We are at the top of the hour, in fact, one past the hour, so I will get started. And I know some people may trickle in over time, but today the topic is fairly simple on its face, but there are a few little interesting tidbits that hopefully can help out in regards to foods and supplements to beat constipation. So welcome, and thank you for attending. If you haven't been here before, I'm Laura, and I am a dietitian that works with Premier Weight Loss. And it's my pleasure to give these webinars. We're trying a different hour. This is 7 p.m. versus 6 p.m. And so certainly interested in knowing what times work best for everyone because we want to be as accessible as possible. And also, if you're new, if you have any questions during or at the very end, I give time at the end for me. Feel free to hit that button at the bottom left hand that does Q&A. You can choose to be anonymous or leave your name, but I'll most likely say your name aloud so you know I'm addressing the question. But without further ado, let's get started. So first and always, I go to this mantra, or at least a phrase that's pretty similar, to remember that the quality of our calories is really important. Even when a lot of the foods I'm going to talk about today might not necessarily have calories, they're still part of usually a high quality or high nutritional value food. And it matters in all cases, but also it matters in addressing issues with constipation if we're looking at food solutions. So what we're going to cover this evening. Basically, we'll touch on some reasons for constipation while we're taking weight loss medications because it goes beyond the other traditional types of reasons why someone might be constipated a little bit. We'll also touch on signs of constipation. It might be a bit intuitive, but it's always nice to sort of look at the more hardline definitions. And then nutrition approaches, so maybe some foods that could help, and also some supplements that might help. But along with things that might help, there are a few supplements and foods that most likely will not help, might actually impede your solution. And so I want to make sure that I also touch on those as well. And finally, as like I said before, we'll allow time for any questions you may have. So why constipation happens on GLP-1 medications? Again, people can be constipated for all kinds of reasons, and there are just a few extra possibilities that may happen if you are on a GLP-1 medication. It may be one of these, it may be all of them or some combination, but to break it down, essentially digestion, of course, is slower. That's the purpose. That's how that medication acts in one way. And so the food in your stomach will move more slowly out of it, but also it will move more slowly through your intestines. So the whole transit time, as it may be referred to, slows down. Also, there is a possibility that these medicines reduce your thirst response. And so while that's not a guarantee, your thirst may be reduced a little more than possibly otherwise, although many people say that they have a hard time being hydrated, whether or not they're taking these medicines. But if that's happening, your fluid intake might not be sufficient. And then finally, with a reduced appetite, that means reduced intake of everything, usually, even healthy foods. And so fiber, again, is one of those nutrients that's hard for almost anyone to get in at the recommended levels. And so then now when we're looking at having a reduced appetite, meeting those levels might become even more difficult. So let's look at some definitions or signs of constipation. This isn't all of the signs, but these are some pretty helpful ones. First of all, it's defined generally as less than 3 stools per week. Also, if you've never seen the Bristol stool scale, here on the right-hand side, it's not the prettiest thing to look at, but it is a very handy tool to use to sort of analyze what might be going on internally when it comes to stool formation. And so types 1 and types 2 are considered signs of constipation. You can see Type 1 here, picture and verbal description, written description here, and also type 2. And it goes on all the way up through type 7. You could also have some pain or difficulty when passing stools, maybe some abdominal pain as well, or the feeling of incomplete elimination. So how can we address this? Of course, it's always a good idea to talk with your provider if it's been going on for a prolonged time despite attempts at intervention. But if we want to try a nutritional approach first, then the main top ones to look at are fluids, fiber, and certain types of foods. And some of these overlap a little bit, but fluid, of course, the goal is at least 64 ounces a day, which is about 1.9 liters. But depending on your physical activity level or your personal needs, you may need up to 100 ounces a day or 3 liters. Also, with the weather getting warmer, it's another consideration to take in. Page 12 in the booklet that Premier Weight Loss gives out, it does show measurement references so you can easier visualize what ounces may look like in commonly used beverage containers. So definitely take advantage of that. In terms of fiber, the two main forms of fiber, the ways we commonly mention and talk about them, are soluble and insoluble fiber. Typically, insoluble fiber would be the one that we say helps decrease the quote-unquote transit time in your intestines to alleviate constipation. However, both fiber types are important. Soluble fiber can also be helpful, but it's not necessarily the one that we would call the one that speeds everything up. The good news is, since I say both fiber types are important, generally, if you're eating a food, which we're getting into here next, if you're eating a food for the purpose of its fiber content, it usually has a combination of both soluble and insoluble fiber. So keep that in mind. So if you're choosing oatmeal, which is high insoluble fiber, it does also have some insoluble with it as well. And then foods. So Activia was one that I actually mentioned here because they use a specific type of probiotic, an active culture. I believe sometimes for marketing purposes, it once was listed as B. regularis, but the official, one of the more official names that I've seen here is, Bifidobacterium lactis with this alphabet soup at the end. So that specifies it there. And Activia is one product that does contain that type of culture, which seems to be helpful. Also, other foods with live and active cultures may be helpful as well. So fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut, those can help populate the gut with some good bacteria. Also, page 11 in your booklet has a list of high fiber foods. And I should mention, if IBS is an issue, that for some people, they can have IBS with constipation, and sometimes certain fibrous foods can be difficult. And so there is actually a handout that I do personally have that talks about fiber without the likely irritating components. So the title is Fiber Without FODMAPs. So it's different types of hard to digest carbohydrates. I'll actually share the image for a second here, just in case anybody needs it. And if anyone does need this as a reference, I'd be happy to send it out individually as well. Okay, let's make sure that it shows up properly. Okay, perfect. So this was actually created by who I consider the expert on IBS, Kate Scarlatta, a dietitian. And you could almost say that she wrote the book. She definitely wrote this educational material, and she lists out fiber goals and also, again, like I said, low FODMAP sources of fiber. So I talked about oatmeal earlier, and that is a good source, along with a variety of other types of high fiber foods. So again, if this is something that you may need, feel free to let me or the Premier Weight Loss staff know. I'd be happy to get this information out to you. Moving back. Okay. A moment to make sure it gets back. Right, there we go. All right. So, like I said, I've got that list for anybody who might have IBS. And then page 11 in your booklet also has a list of high fiber foods. Interestingly enough, while I was researching this just to make sure I wasn't missing anything, although this topic can go and dive deeper and deeper into various foods. So this isn't all inclusive, but this is certainly the high points. But I did notice an interesting little study that was conducted with kiwi fruit, specifically the golden kiwi fruit, where 2 kiwi fruit a day seemed to help increase stool frequency. Not in a dramatic amount, but in more than you would expect. And so that also may be helpful. And if you like kiwi, such as myself, it's kind of a nice little piece of news. Now, sometimes food won't cut it, especially if the appetite is low and our intake is low. We might not be interested in all the foods to address it. Or maybe we don't like yogurt. Some people don't like the texture, find it unpleasant. So let's look at some other options that aren't going to be quite as filling or maybe unappealing. So some supplements that may be helpful. And this again is one of those situations where the strain of probiotic is very important because different strains can have different effects, which I did touch on in one webinar I gave a few weeks ago, I believe, about probiotics in particular. So I looked into some of the more considered to be more helpful based on some studies and probably also some anecdotal reports, but I wanted to look into what has the most compelling information or the compelling results so far. And so Culturelle, abdominal support and comfort. So it is different than the standard Culturelle you might encounter. So read the label carefully. Has a certain type with the coagulans. Same as the product Shift Digestive Advantage. So these 2 products contain this coagulans bacteria, which may be helpful. And then this probiotic lozenge, which I've not encountered, but it actually had this bacteria here, L. reuteri, and then the DSM 17938 specifically. This one had some very compelling results. And I really wanted to list a specific supplement called Gerber Soothe Colic Drops. But unfortunately, it looks like that's been discontinued as a product. I had some great results that seem to be showing, especially because of this particular organism. And so I did find this Gaia probiotic lozenge, which you may find appealing as well because it would probably taste pretty good, but it contains that exact organism that could be very helpful. So I wanted to list that out. Moving on to fiber. So all of these except for the bottom one, the Unifiber, they are a soluble and insoluble fiber product. So psyllium husks has soluble and insoluble, although more soluble, just so you're aware. The Swanson one is a decent brand that's passed testing through a third-party testing group, and Metamucil is also old reliable. Most of us know it. And then Unifiber, like I said, is just insoluble fiber, just so you're aware. And then moving on to what won't help. Some of these may be obvious, but some of these actually surprised even me, although it made sense in the end after reading about it. So first of all, with foods, bananas. This one may be the more surprising out of all of these because they are a good source of fiber. People often will recommend bananas if they, the brat diet, bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast for people who've had upset stomach and digestive issues. However, it is a good source of fiber, but it can cause or aggravate pre-existing constipation due to the content of tannins and an amylase-resistant starch in the content of that. Be aware, the more raw it is, the higher the content of these resistant starches are. So I don't know many people to eat green bananas, but please be aware that that is a potential issue. Also, inulin in foods. So this is a type of fiber that is often added to certain foods. One I can think of in particular is our Fiber One bars, especially when they just came out. I haven't looked at their ingredient list lately, but it's a good way to add, increased fiber, and it may be beneficial. However, it can also increase gas. So again, when Fiber One bars first came out, I'll never forget, as a dietitian class, we all decided to eat them. And by the end of our class day, we were all feeling miserable because of sort of the gas producing effects that it had. So even though there may be some benefit, there may also be a bit of a, is the juice worth the squeeze situation there. As for supplements, you may already be familiar with the fact that iron is sort of notorious for causing or leading to constipation. There are certain forms of iron that seem to not cause that as frequently, but the ones that are more or less known for it, if you will, are ones that are the ferrous versions or ferric salt forms. Also, calcium, certain forms of calcium, so calcium carbonate, may be a bit more constipating. And with that in mind, calcium citrate tends to be less constipating. So just so you're aware of that. And then others that I saw reported on consumerlab.com, which I do use to do a lot of analysis of supplements and also just reviewing some of the new information that can come out about certain supplements or other products. There was a mention that, and this happens far less frequent than, say, the iron or the calcium, but I figured it was beneficial to mention. So cinnamon or berberine, nattokinase, chlorella, NAC, and beta-sitosterol. So if you're taking any of those as a supplement and you've been experiencing constipation, if you're comfortable with pausing it or speak with your provider about whether or not it may be contributing or not, it's something to keep in mind. So I wanted to specifically mention these. I did also read that excessive intake of vitamin D, so vitamin D3 in very high levels, because that helps with absorption of calcium, it may also be potentially problematic in terms of leading to constipation. So, putting it together. Constipation, it's not a guaranteed side effect, but it's definitely a possible one that you may experience while on these medications. So be sure to be aware of the signs of constipation and don't be afraid to talk with your provider if you're experiencing it to a degree that you weren't expecting or are having discomfort. Of course, be aware diet can help, making sure you're focusing on fluids, making sure you're focusing on fiber. And I would also like to mention, if you have not been getting in a lot of fiber, you want to increase gradually because taking too much at once can also be counterproductive. And also probiotic foods. When those might not work, fiber and probiotic supplements can also be helpful. But be aware that some foods, and especially the supplements that we mentioned, can have a constipating effect. And again, I didn't list absolutely everything with foods that can necessarily help or cause issues, but I think that these are all the top and main ones that you would encounter more often. And with that, I think we've reached the time for any questions if you have them. And if not, it's a beautiful, still semi-sunny evening, but I'll be here for a few minutes, happy to answer. And again, if you didn't hear me initially, you can feel free to hit the Q&A button at the bottom left of your screen. You can choose to be anonymous, or you can leave your name. And again, I will most likely say your name out loud so you know that I'm addressing your question in particular. It can be about this topic, or if you have another nutrition-related question in mind, feel free to bring it up. And I look forward to answering any of them. Okay, I think we are about 2 minutes past, so I certainly don't want to delay anyone. Don't let me rush you. I'm happy to keep this open for a little bit. And of course, if you think of a question afterwards, I always want to let everyone know. If you think of any questions after this that you either didn't have a chance to write or came to mind later on, please reach out to the Premier Weight Loss staff. They will be happy to either answer it for you or get your question to me, and I can get back to anyone about specific questions that they may have. Well, very well. I think that will be about it for our evening. So thank you again for everyone for coming this evening, and I hope that you got something informative out of this. And if anything comes up where you have questions, like I said, feel free to let the Premier Weight Loss staff know. They'll reach out to me. But otherwise, I hope to see you all next time and have a lovely rest of your evening. Bye.